y'all, it's Hope here at Crafty Hope, and welcome. I am still sharing some of my junk journal January pages, and this is day 28, and the prompt was grungy. This challenge comes from Meg of Meg Journals. I will link her below. January's over. You can probably find those prompts out there if you want to use them, and I believe she'll probably do this again in July, so stay tuned for all of that. You can see I'm starting here with kind of a blank page, so I scribbled on some Stabilo Woody in a brown, knowing that to me, when I think of grungy, I think brown and dirty and that kind of thing. Not that I think it's gross. I love grunge. So I was all in for this prompt. I was like, let's go for it. So I am going to, I didn't even dry that. I guess I didn't add much water. I did activate that Stabilo Woody because it is water reactive, and it kind of, smearing it around kind of gave it that muddy effect. So this piece of paper I'm using, y'all, it is indeed grungy. It is a piece of paper that I think my husband had gotten like some information at the pool store about our pool or something he had bought there, and he had left it outside on our wrought iron table, where the table itself stained it, being outside in the elements stained it. It was absolutely grungy, so I'm using it with my Oohoo glue stick and collaging down on this page. So yeah, that's all I really needed to do to make this grungy, but the whole thing to me is absolute luscious grunge, and I love it. So that's part of the reason I'm sharing it. I was gonna share, oh gosh, was it date? I don't even know. It was the prompt was lyrics, and the more I looked at that page that I made, you can go on Instagram and find those. The more I looked at the page, the more simple I realized how it was. Basically, I threw down some collage and then hand wrote in the lyrics I wanted on. Well, I made a what do you call it? A flip out page? What do you call that? I don't know. With just some washi tape, and the little door opens so that it's the continuation of the lyric. So super simple one for whatever day that was. I would say 26 or 27. But I decided that was just too simple. I wasn't even gonna bother sharing that with y'all. So sorry about that. So I've switched from my grungy pool paper to some Tim Holtz tissue paper there. That's some of the designer tissue. And then I am using some deli paper that I stamped on with some of my hand carved stamps and some Stays On ink. Super simple. And again, just using that Oohoo and sticking it down. These marks are so great. I love this. If you don't have like hand carved stamps or stamps you want to do this with, you could take like maybe a permanent marker or something and mark on some tissue paper or something and do something similar to this just with your own marks. Or you could mark straight on it. I like the transparent nature of it, that I don't know, that it gave it that frosty effect, but it's still, you could see some of the other paper, like where I had used the woody underneath. So I don't know. I like that transparency of it. And I'm pretty much covering this whole thing, I guess protecting the page underneath. You can still see that page underneath, but yeah. So for additional grunge, I'm using this Distress Oxide spray and, what is it called? Like Antique Linen, I think. I will have it for sure below. I'll have links to Amazon if I can get it. I am an associate, so I will get a small portion of if you buy anything while you're there, but there's no extra cost to you. So that's my little disclaimer. This is some Liquitex acrylic ink in, I can't remember, transparent burnt umber, I think, or raw umber. I never can remember, y'all. It's a brown. So I dripped that on top of that Distress Oxide spray, sprayed it with my little Distress sprayer, and I'm going to move that around with a wet paintbrush too to kind of get it to go where I want it to go. So additional grunge, more browns, more blacks, and that little bit of Distress Oxide, always yummy. So I've dried it and decided I needed a little more black. and some splatter. So I'm using a graphite stick. I will link to the Lyra one because I know that's a trusted one that I know a lot of people use. The one I'm using, I found at the dollar store forever ago. So I'm using it, and once it runs out, I'll probably buy some Lyra ones. So, and then I will try it again. I have a little container there. You can kind of see it on the far right. That's got a bunch of like threads and like little snippets of threads and ribbons, and I think there's a little container of buttons in there, all kinds of just tiny things that get lost on my desk. And yeah, so I'm pulling out some of them, and some of that thread I pulled apart a little bit more, and here's some of the little pieces of fabric I'm also going to pull in. Just anything that felt a little fun and grungy. I'm not shying away from color. I didn't want anything like dark red or anything like that that would move the attention from the grunge too much. I wanted it to still kind of meld into that background, so I'm keeping with some of the I guess the cooler tones than any of the warm tones, except for that little piece of rust-dyed fabric there. Okay, so here's a little white button. I'm looking at it, and I'm going to move this little stack around of stuff. To me, this still felt very grungy because everything's kind of frayed and tattered, and yeah, I think I looked up the definition of grungy before I started on this page, and it was like anything that's dirty and worn and things like that, and I was like, I'm okay with that. I used some matte gel medium and a palette knife. I spread the matte gel straight onto my page, stuck that clump of thread into it, and then onto the fabric, I'm putting the matte gel and sticking it down. So yeah, so it's a little bit of time. So I'm going to turn to the button real quick to decide what to do with it, and I will end up finding some, I'm not even sure what color it is, maybe an off-white thread in my stash already on a needle. Makes it so much easier. And I'm going in through the front so that the tail is on the front of this button, and I can tie a little knot on top of it and then fray the ends of that thread. This is one of my favorite things to do because it adds, while buttons do add texture, it's not like a whole ton of it. And if you do this where the ends are at the front and you fray it, it's just a little thing I love to do. So, and I kept them kind of long. A lot of times I trim those tails kind of short. I kept it long, again, keeping it tattered, keeping it worn and frayed. And I happened to look in my little thing of adhesives, and I have this little thing of Aliens tacking glue in the squeeze bottle. It needs to be used, so I'm putting it on my button to stick it down. And from there, I'm going to turn, trying to find a sentiment, something to put on top of this little stack, to be the focal of this. And I kind of knew that these chip quotes from Tim Holtz were the way to go, and I've got a whole stack of them, so I'm going to sort for a while. I knew I didn't have much space to work with, so I wanted something kind of chunky and blocky. At first I thought this Noted was going to be really good because it had like the height that I wanted and all of that. And I was leaning toward it, so I'm going to leave it there for a minute and keep kind of looking, and I'll find the same kind of thing. Oh, yeah, I went for it, etc. And then I end up finding one that says found, and I was like, oh, that is perfect for grungy, because typically when you find something, it's often, well, for me anyway, it's on the ground, it's grungy, it's been touching the dirt floor and all of that. So I decided it was, yeah, found was what I wanted. So these are made out of chipboard, so the backs are super thick, but you can kind of separate them and pull it apart. So that's what I did. And I didn't want it to have that stark whiteness. I wanted to have that grungy feel. So I used some old paper distress ink over, like, around the sides kind of thickly, so that I could then rub it inwards so it's not like super dark on there. Yeah. And then I kind of bent and folded that so it was also a little grungy, distressed the edges with that distressing tool, and now I'm using walnut stained distress ink around the edges for a darker brown. So yeah, made that nice and grungy itself. And I think it, yeah, I made, yeah, just altering it just a little bit. And I'll use, again, matte gel to, yeah, I'll put it on the back of that because it is kind of heavy, and stick it on top. And I'll think I'm done for about I don't know, a minute. And I'm like, no, I need something else on here. So I end up turning to I got a bucket of rusty things off in my office. So I went and looked in there and found a rusty washer. Oh, I'm going to ink the edges too of this page, just so there's not a whole lot of white edges, even, that it all is framed up in kind of a grungy way. So there is that rusty washer. Because it is super heavy, I'm not going to use the tacky glue. Instead, I'll use some E6000. I gotta clean the nozzle. It dries up so fast. And I will, yeah, put just a little bit of that E6000 on there, stick it into the spot where I felt like something was missing, and then that is it. I'm going to give you all a couple looks at this. If you have any questions or suggestions or whatever, I'd love to hear from you. And make sure, if you like this, to hit that thumbs up. And I'd love, love, love if you would subscribe. All right, guys, thanks so much for coming by, and I will see y'all later. Bye.